Hello, dear friends, and I'd like to say a few words on Parashat Truma in the book of Exodus and the book of Shmot, the building of the temple. Now, let me start by telling a story and relating to this story to what I would like to say today. The story is told about Yitzhak Perlman, the famous American-born violinist, a world renowned. In November 1995, Yitzhak Perlman came to stage to give a concert at the Lincoln Center in New York City. If you have ever been to his concerts, you know that getting on the stage is no small achievement. He was stricken with polio as a child and has braces on both his legs and walks with the aid of two crutches. To see him walk across the stage one step at a time, painfully and slowly, is quite a sight. By now, the audience is used to the ritual. They sit quietly while he makes his way across the stage. They remain reverently silent until he undoes the clasps on his legs. They wait until he is ready to play. But this time, something went wrong. Just as he finished the first few bars, one of the strings on his violin broke. You could hear the snap. It went off like a gunfire across the room. There was no mistaking what that sound made. There was no mistaking what he had to do. People there figured to themselves, well, he'll get up, put on the clasps, pick up the crutches, limp off the stage, find another violin, or wait for somebody to bring it to him. But he didn't. Instead, he waited a moment, he closed his eyes, then signaled the conductor to begin again. The orchestra began, and he played from where he had left off. And he played with such a passion, with such a power, and with such purity, they'd never heard that before. Of course, everybody knows that it's impossible to play a symphonic work with just three strings on your violin. I know that, you know that. But that night, Yitzhak Perlman refused to know that. You could see him modulating, changing, and recomposing the piece in his head. At one point, it sounded like he was detuning the strings to get new sounds from them, something they had never made before. When he finished, there was an awesome silence in the room. And then people rose and cheered. There was an extraordinary outburst of applause from every corner of the auditorium. Everyone was on their feet, screaming, cheering, doing everything they could to show the appreciation for what he had done. He smiled, wiped the sweat from his brow, raised his bow to quiet the audience. And then he said, not boastfully, but in a quiet, pensive, and reverent tone, you know, sometimes it's an artist's task to find out just how much music you can make with what you have left. As I say these words, two things come to mind. One, if you'll allow me before I continue my words on the Parsha, a friend of mine who passed away last week, somebody who had a very hard lifetime, and he was a constant dialysis patient, had all different economic issues and family problems, but he was very, very optimistic about life. And when I read this story, I think of him too, Yitzchak Chaim ben Esther. But I want to connect this story not only on the individual level, which is amazing, people who can face adversity in their lives and be able to hit it head on and seeing it as a challenge and remaining optimistic. This for all of us is inspiring. My father was that way too, and it was greatly inspiring, especially in his last years. How does it relate to Parshat Truma? Well, you probably have noticed that 2 Parshiot ago was the giving of the Torah. And it was the giving of the Torah to the people of Israel at Sinai. Now, we know exactly what happened at that giving, what we call the giving of the Torah, which is, of course, a saying of the Decalogue. God's uttering the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, to the people of Israel. We know it happened because we're told this just in a few chapters from now, in chapter 32 in Exodus, in Shmot, the story of the worshiping of the golden calf, which is not told in the book of Exodus and the book of Shmot at the time it happened, but it's told us much longer. How do these parshiot work? from Truma, there are two portions of the week, two parshiot, which talk about building the temple. And then at the end, you have two parshiot talking about how it actually happened, how it was executed. And in the middle, in Parshat Kitisa, you have the story of the sin of the golden calf, not in its proper place, of course, because it happened right as after the Decalogue was said. Actually, not after the Decalogue was said, when Moses came down with the tablets. So God said the Decalogue, Moses went up for 40 days, came down with the tablets, saw the people of Israel worshiping the golden calf, and then destroyed both the tablets and the golden calf. So why is it then later on now? So Rashi argues that it's not in its place, and I want to take this argument a little bit. When the Jewish people, the people of Israel, worshiped the golden calf, and there's a lot to say about this. If you look very carefully at the wording of what happened, it says there were the tribe of Levi was asked by Moses to kill everybody who had worshipped the golden calf. And it was not more than 8,000 people out of the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who were gathered at Sinai. We know from the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, that there were over 600,000 men from the ages of 20 to 60. Add to that the children, add to that older, add to that the women. There were definitely over 1.5 million people at Sinai, if not 2 million. Then you also had the mixed multitude, the heir of Rav, definitely 2 million people. So the fact that it was actually such a small amount means what happens in general in life, that a small amount of people start pushing towards something, whether good or bad, and the others let it happen to see what's going to, in their quietude and in their silence, they're sort of accomplice. Now, there are also explanations why this happened. Judah Levi said, living in Egypt, especially the mixed multitude, as Rashi said, was used to the fact that there's an in-between and Moses was gone. But I don't want to talk about that at the moment. The sin of the golden calf, the idea of looking for an intermediate to worship God, and that's really what the sin is about, because they believed in God, was considered a very severe sin. B'yom pokti ufakadati alechem. The day I remember it, according to our tradition, little by little, this punishment is meted out over the centuries so that it shouldn't be too harsh. But it's the constant reminder to us not to use intermediaries. Human beings like using intermediaries. They like pictures, they like icons, they like amulets, they like holy people, they like all these different things that'll be intermediates, and instead of worshiping God directly. This is called the sin of the golden calf. And after this sin, in Parshat Mishpatim, where the Torah, as I said, in Devarim, in Moses' last talk to the Jewish people, there he does put them together in Parshat Vayetchanan, the Decalogue and the sin of the golden calf, which happens 40 days later. But here it's not. Here it's brought much later. First, we're told about Parshat Mishpatim, the precepts, which was last week. Then we're talking about, then of course, Parshat Truma, which was just this past week, building the temple. And then it tells the story. What is the meaning here? And this brings me back to the first story that I just told you. The people of Israel were slaves for 210 years. And Moses gave them new hope for a new life, a new embracement with God, a new ethical way of living and spiritual way of living. It was quite amazing to take people from such a low level of life and society, not only to give them an identity, to give them an ultimate path in a relationship with God. It's actually not surprising it wasn't so easy for them to do such things. Being after the sin of the golden calf is called playing a violin which is missing a string, meaning everything was going well. They went through the Red Sea. And Nachshon ben Aminadav, according to our tradition, was the first one to walk in that Red Sea, and people followed. But the waters on the two sides, as it says in the book of Shemot. And they followed in perfect faith, and they came to Sinai, and they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we shall do and we shall listen. And everything that God said we shall do. And in last week's Parsha, in Mishpatim, Moses says, are you sure you want to do this? And he makes the special brit. He makes this special covenant with the people. And then again, they said, yes, even now that we've heard the precepts, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen, because they want that relationship, as I said last week. But they are now at a handicap. And also in last week's Parshat Mishpatim, God says, you know what, I'm not so sure it's good to have a direct relationship. Let me send my angel. And my angel will be in charge of them, because it's not so good for them to deal directly with me. And Moses says, no, if your countenance is not going with us, there's no point for us to continue. Moses said, this is the whole point. The whole point is a relationship with the Jewish people, not just with me. I'm just a little leader. I'm just the shaliach. I'm the emissary, Moses says to God. But these are the people you want to have the relationship. Have it. Don't send the angels. Have it directly. So then the question is, how do you do that? How do you have it directly? And then God says, let them build me a temple. And it says in this week's Parsha, Vasuli Mikdash, they shall make for me a temple. V'shachanti, which means a sanctuary, Mikdash. V'shachanti betocham, and I will dwell in their midst. Of course, a lot of the commentaries point out, it doesn't say, and they shall make me a temple and I shall dwell in it. It says they shall make me a temple and I shall dwell in their midst, betocham, among the people. Now, lest you think that that's just an interesting drasha, a nice interpretation, but not the simple meaning. If we look at this week's Haftorah, which is always the part of the prophets, which is taken in order to parallel what we read in this week's Parsha. So in this Haftorah is taken from the book of Kings 1, chapter 5. And when Solomon builds the temple, the first temple, so it says here, it says that God spoke to Shlomo. God spoke to Solomon. He said, this house, which you have built for me, which you have built, if you go in the ways of my commandments and my precepts and keep them, and if you keep all my commandments to walk and abide by them, and if you shall keep my word with you, which I have told your father David, then I shall dwell among the people of Israel, and I shall not leave my people Israel. So here we have it direct also in the prophets. God says to Shlomo, you've built this house. If you walk in the ways of the precepts, the ways of your father David, I will make my presence. And he doesn't say in the house, he says among the people of Israel. So what does this mean? This means that, you see, building the tabernacle or building the temple was the solution to the Chet HaEgel, to the sin of the golden calf, because the sin of the golden calf was the need for an intermediary. Now, I know a lot of people say, okay, so the temple was the intermediary. And then the question is this offerings in the temple, is that something ideal, or was it just giving in to the whims of the people because that's what they were used to? And of course, you have Maimonides and his Guide for the Perplexed, who says it was giving in to the people's need for sacrifice, and that's why the temple was used, because they needed some type of thing to do to connect to God, which is the opinion of Maimonides. And this could be strengthened from Leviticus, Vayikra, chapter 17, verse 7, where it says, "V'lo yizbechu od lasirim asher im zochim," and let them not give offerings anymore to the spirits, to those, sirim is a difficult word, but those demons, those spirits that they used to give offerings to. So instead, they'll give it in the temple, in the tabernacle. That's a possibility. But I want to explain it differently. The Talmud says in Sukkah that on the festival of Sukkot, of Tabernacles, there was a special evening where they would do festivity was called Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the happiness of the water libation ceremony, Beit HaShoeva. The Talmud says, why was it called the water drawing ceremony? Because in Hebrew, Shi'iva, the water drawing ceremony. And it says, Misham Shoavim Ruach HaKodesh, because when they went to the temple, they would draw the divine spirit upon themselves. There was something about the temple which every individual could feel this relationship with God. In fact, the Talmud says that Jonah, the prophet, like from the book of Jonah, the way that he received prophecy was that he came from the northern kingdom down to Judea, down to Jerusalem on the festivals, and he was always there on the 3 pilgrim festivals. And one day, in dancing around in the temple, God just made himself, revealed himself to him. This is the power of the temple. So the idea of the temple really is the connection to every individual. So there is the possibility of direct connection, which makes the sin of the golden calf unnecessary. You understand what I'm saying? So in other words, the whole point of the temple represents the idea that God can now connect to the people directly without an intermediary. So intermediaries are unnecessary. This becomes the solution, in a sense, to the sin of the golden calf, for the need for people for intermediaries. Come to the temple and you'll understand. You don't need an amulet, and you don't need that miracle worker, and you don't need that special magical formula. You need to be there. You need to be immersed in prayer. You need to create that relationship, and it will happen. This was the goal. This was the goal. And that's why Parshat Truma Tetzaveh, which are the Parshat which talk about the building of the command to build the temple, and of course the last 2 Parshiot, which are there, Vayakel Pekudei, which are they were talking about the execution, are surrounding the Parsha which talks of the sin of the golden calf, because this is supposed to be the solution. Now, I'm not going to talk about korbanot. I'm as I was saying, my point at the moment is korbanot. There's a lot to talk about the sacrifice of the meaning of the offering. I don't want to do it right now, but I want to say that it's the temple, the idea of the temple, the word mishkan from shochen, the divine presence. This is the point of the temple. This connection between man and God, this ability to connect to this otherworldliness within the temple forum. And there's some people could do it anywhere, but most people need that special place for it to happen. So this is the idea. This is the teaching of Truma, that God is now building this telling us to build the tabernacle, build the temple to have this direct relationship. And everybody can have this direct relationship. It's not only unique individuals. We're all here because we're all emissaries, you might say, to live this life that God gave us. And we might not even believe. It doesn't matter, because we're all part of it. And I've always said that life is like something that it's like walking into a cinema where you didn't see the beginning of the movie. You're definitely not going to see the end. And you're trying to figure it out. And the more complicated thing is that you're one of the actors. And it's true, you might try to hide on the sidelines. Maybe I'm just an extra, but actually you're a central figure, because in your life, you're a central figure of that movie. So the connection is there. All we have to do is open ourselves up a little bit to the direct relationship. And this was the point of the temple. And this is why the sin of the golden calf was considered such a severe sin, because it was missing the whole point of the relationship. It's not about intermediaries. It's about developing the relationship between God and man as we live our lives in this world. Shalom, shalom.